Okay, the brand new album, A Solisbury Boy, is due out on the 15th of September. I will put a purchasing link just below this video. The first question pertains to the title track. I believe it references your time with Folk Blues Incorporated.
Yes,
When
yes,
you're
indeed.
doing, when
You
you're
say
doing, go
you
on.
say the name as though it's a worldwide famous band.
Well,
Well, it existed for a very short period of time and only in the folk scene.
what
But
was
yeah,
that London folk scene like though in the 60s? And did you bump into Paul Simon because he was doing the rounds, wasn't he then?
I'm what? How did you know that? Yes, he was. In fact, we were with the same agent.
Hmm.
And I remember traveling in on the tube with him to play a gig in a pub in North London. And it was a really happening scene in
Yeah.
those days. There was a club in which I reference obliquely in the song Salisbury Boys in Greek Street called Les Coussins, or
Yeah.
Les Cousins, we used to call it. And there was the Troubadour, Bungees. I can't remember the others. Yeah, it was a busy time. I
Yeah.
mean, we were a struggling folk band,
Yeah.
um, so we were earning very little money, but it was a nice time.
How do you think the English folk scene in London at that time compared with the Greenwich Village folk scene in New York, which was also thriving, I think, in the early
It was the,
60s?
well, it was the equivalent. I think probably Greenwich Village was probably much busier and much hotter, much more happening than London. But I don't know. I mean, I was in the middle of it, and I was 20, 21 years old, and so I didn't really know what was happening.
Well, interestingly, I've read quite a lot that says that psychedelia and the summer of love struck the death knell really for the Greenwich folk scene as it all moved to
Yeah,
the West Coast. I'm just wondering, how did the summer of love and all that flower power stuff impact the folk scene in London at the time?
well, I sort of left the folk scene. It was a temporary thing. There were friends of mine in Salisbury, and we did just local the folk clubs around Salisbury and in Southampton. Um, but after that, I became much more involved in the theatre. I
Uh,
joined the local theatre, the professional theatre in Salisbury in '66, and I was more of an actor then, although with always writing and always singing and playing the guitar and piano and so on. But mainly acting gradually took over from the music. So I can't answer your question.
uh, well, I'm interested, in the title of Salisbury Boy. Now, if my memory serves me right, I remember there being a very famous poem called A Solisbury Lad.
Oh, that's right.
Was that Gerard Manley Hopkins? I can't remember who wrote it, but I remember
I
studying
can't.
as a boy. But Salisbury, of course, is not far from my old stomping grounds. I was born in Reading, which
Yeah.
is not too far away from there. You mentioned in the song, the times they were changing. I mean, how big an influence was Dylan on you at the time? And did you feel that change really was palpable?
Yes, I think so. I don't know what sort of change. It was a sort of, it was a romantic kind of change without any practicality. Uh, as I say, I was sort of 19, 20. I loved the Freewheeling album. The three of us in the group
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
would listen to it all the time and learn to play "Don't Think Twice, It's All Right" and all the other songs on it. It was a great album, and that was very influential. Um, yeah, I sort of got other tastes. Really, as soon as the Beatles started, that was the end of folk for me. Although I did join a folk rock band called the Albion Band briefly
Mhm.
in 1980 and did a bit of gigging with them. So it's still sort of there in the background.
Yeah, yeah. Interestingly, Bruce Springsteen on his last album has referenced some of his older material, dug something out the archive. I'm just wondering if you've done the same thing for Over Your Love.
Yes, exactly what I've done. It's a song that I never finished, which I started writing in the sometime in the '70s, I think. Um, and I kept playing that. There's a riff that drives the beginning of the song, and I kept playing it over the years. I thought, it's a shame. And anyway, recently I went back and tried to find the lyrics and try and remember what the rest of the song was, because that was I was remembering the chorus, but I couldn't find any lyrics. Well, a couple of bits and pieces, but they weren't good enough. And so I started again and tried to relive my 20-something self, not too critically in the lyric, and just completely rewrote all the verses, but kept the chorus.
Yeah, okay. Was John Lennon the inspiration for the songwriter? I don't know if I've got that wrong.
No, it wasn't. I don't know what the inspiration was. I think it was probably all that was happening in Ukraine at the time, and and the things that Putin was doing were just appalling. But I didn't start with that idea at all. That I think I got there was a riff that I got, a piano riff, electric piano riff, from some incidental music from Better Call Saul, actually.
Oh, wow, okay.
Started with that and started sort of singing rubbish, singing bits and pieces of words. And the first line I thought of was, "If I was a songwriter." And I thought, well, that's quite a nice kind of paradoxical way to start a song. As a songwriter. But then it turned into this song about a songwriter who writes an anti-war song and plays it to the people of in a war zone in his fantasy, and they say it's not always like that. You have to fight. You have to defend your country. You have to defend your children. And so then it kind of turned into that sort of dreamlike thing. And I don't know, I've never written anything like it. So, these things come from you don't know where.
Yeah.
When they do.
Yeah. What was the inspiration? Excuse me. What was the inspiration for The Sentimental Boy?
Again, I think, I can't remember any specific inspiration. Again, I just started with a piano riff, and I'm trying to think now how the lyrics started. I wanted to tell a story, but it gradually unfolded. Like when writers say, when they write a book, it sort of, after a few pages, it takes over and the characters, have their own. And it was a bit like that. So it just happened, and I thought of, there was it's in various sections, different musical sections, and I loved the idea of using strings like sort of Eleanor Rigby type strings, the strings that George Martin used for that. Very present rhythmic strings in one of the sections. And it took me a long time to decide whether to have a happy ending or a sad ending. And I decided in the end on a sad ending. But it's sort of, But it's something that I've never written anything like it before. It's just a little story in various musical sections.
Yeah. What's the writing process actually like for you when you write songs? I mean, do you get an idea for a line or a melody? I mean, how does it work for you?
It depends. I like to have a song on the go all the time. I have one at the moment, but because the album's out, I've sort of relaxed a bit. I just sit down at the piano, and it depends. An idea when I'm walking, an idea will pop into my head. I'll make a note of it on my phone. I go to the piano, sing bits and pieces, play, try some musical ideas. It varies, and gradually, I make notes. I make a very rough first page in the back of my diary of ideas, fragments of lyrics. Then I sort of, on the next page, I bring the best of those fragments into some sort of palpable form, and keep working like that, and refining over the three and four page next couple of pages until it blossoms into a song. It's a wonderful process, and any songwriter will tell you it's frustrating when you can't find a way of finishing, or can't find the idea that you're looking for, the rhyme you're looking for. But when it's finished, there's no other feeling like it. It's fun.
Sure, sure. Why the tribute to Mozart?
Yeah, I discovered Mozart late in my life. I play the piano after breakfast every morning, and I had some piano books from when I was learning piano when I was a teenager, and of course they had Mozart in, very simple early Mozart, and I'm playing through those. Oh, this is rather nice. Let's try and actually, I think initially the intention was to keep the brain alive with some sort of activity. So many people who know about aging talk about keeping the brain alive by learning a new skill, playing chess, playing music, reading. So I thought, anyway, I got completely hooked on Mozart. And I now play 1, 2, 3, probably 4 or 5 pieces every morning. Quite difficult pieces. I mean, it's improved my sight reading as well, and hopefully my brain keeps my brain.
Yeah.
So I just love him. I didn't really. It really wasn't. It wasn't my taste for a long time. No classical music. I suppose Chopin maybe, but Mozart's really took that over, and I thought it was fun to have a tribute to him with a sort of a little groovy musical riff in the background.
Sure.
Yeah.
When Pinball was released, it got to number 22 in the charts. What was your impression of the music scene in the 1970s?
Well, I loved it. I loved the it was always a bit of a surprise, because I didn't say, right now I want to be a pop star. Let's see if I can get a record contract. I was working as an actor, and I played a character called Johnny Tomorrow in this terrible old sort of Bodies on the Lawn Agatha Christie sub play thriller, and I wrote the music for a song that this character had to write. The author liked the song. I did a little demo. He took it round to a couple of record companies without me knowing, and that led to Chrysalis Records inquiring if I had any other material, and I made some demos with a friend of mine, and that led to a record contract. I was in good 10 years after. Jethro Tull were at Chrysalis at that time. Ian Anderson was lovely to me. My first gig was with a sort of scratch band at a Chrysalis dinner party. And I was really nervous, and Ian Anderson put his arm around me and calmed me down. So I was, but I wasn't really aware of the workings of the music scene. It sort of just happened to me. And it was fun while it lasted. And Pinball's going to be 50 next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was going to ask you, actually, and you're talking about songwriting, and the song "Running Through the City" seems quite a mournful number in some respects. I'm just wondering, what is the music? Did you feel that the music industry was quite a lonely existence or something, or what inspired?
Well, it was I was just missing home. I was touring. Chrysalis sent me on an interview tour of America, starting in LA, I did San Francisco, Chicago, and New York, ending up in New York. And and I had a manager at that time who was with me, but I was really quite lonely and homesick. And I wrote that song in Chicago, I think. And I've got a feeling the line running through the city from nowhere to nowhere, I ripped off from Bob Dylan. I think it's a Bob Dylan line. But yeah, I was intermittently enjoying it, excited, but then very quickly I wanted to be home. I didn't like traveling around.
So that very itinerant lifestyle was just not for you.
Yeah.
What was it like working with Ian Anderson and Barriemore Barlow? Because I'm a huge Jethro Tull fan. I'm just keen. You worked at Anderson, didn't you?
Yes, he did. There's a song. I wrote the music for a production of As You Like It, which I was in Birmingham in the 70s, and one of the songs was Under the Greenwood Tree. And I thought the song was really successful setting of that song. And I thought, I can't remember whether I thought of it or whether I was working with a producer called Del Newman, sadly not with us anymore. And he may have suggested. Anyway, Ian came along and we sent him a demo of on a cassette of the track the day before he was due in the studio. He came in a note perfect with the most beautiful arrangement for flute, and such a perfectionist. I mean, for me, he did a couple of takes and that was it, but he went on for at least another half an hour, 3/4 of an hour. Is that intonation right? Yeah. At one point he said, do you want me to play, do you want me to make the intonation with the singer, or shall I do it in, shall I do it in tune? Something like that, I can't remember, because I'd just done a rough demo and I always used to sing flat. But he was great. And then Barlow, what's his name?
Barriemore Barlow.
Barriemore Barlow came in, I think the next day, and sat on the floor with an array of percussion instruments. And he was great. But I remember Ian particularly, because he was such a perfectionist. He was lovely.
Yeah. Interestingly, AllMusic describes Pinball as an exquisite piece of post-McCartney pop. To what extent would you agree with them?
It was I can't look at it rationally, objectively, of course, because it was completely subjective expression of what was happening for me in probably 1972, maybe 3. Out of work, just finished with a girlfriend, no money to speak of, living in the heart of West End, right behind the Cambridge Theatre, actually, in one room in a friend's house. And all of the things that I mentioned were things that were happening to me at the time. I think Norman Mailer had a book out about Marilyn Monroe. And when I was walking through Soho to get the paper one morning, it was I saw it in a window in a bookshop. There was a black cat that was the house cat. It kept jumping out at you in the dark and eating all the food. So it was a kind of a sweet and sour. It was quite a down, lonely time for me. But of course, that generally, with sort of failed relationships, are the stuff of songwriters, is what they live on. And that was what I was about at the time.
But you released about, I think, 2 or 3 albums between 74 and 76. Is that right? What made you want to stop that and give it up for acting?
I didn't. they fired me, Chrysalis. They said they weren't getting what they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really uncomfortable with the business side of the pop world. I mean, I loved being in the studio. That was bliss. Having the best session musicians come in and be sympathetic to your baby that you've just written. Mm-hmm. And I just loved that. But anything to do with any of the hype surrounding the pop world, I just didn't fit in with that. So I think after they weren't hearing, after Pinball was a relative success, although it didn't actually make, as you say, the top 20. They wanted to hear, which is very common. They wanted to hear the same thing again, so they could have a repeat Pinball in a way. Mm-hmm. I very much wanted the second single to be a song called "Enjoy It." Mm-hmm. And relatively recently, five years ago, I did a remix of it, and it was really successful on Spotify. Mm-hmm. So that sort of, I was satisfied that had finally worked out. But so, what was your original question?
I was asking about wasn't it about Pinball being a bit of post-McCartney pop or something like that? Or
yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, yes, it was. Well, I'm 2 years younger than Paul, mm-hmm. So what am I going to be influenced by? and I was desolate that they'd split up in 1970-ish, whenever it was. So that's referenced.
Actually, I thought my old memories failing me. The question asked, we were talking about you moving from music, being dissatisfied with the music industry, moving to acting.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, acting sort of took me over. I played Hamlet when I was 26, mm-hmm. in a really good production, and I was really very good in it. And I knew I was good, and I knew I was right in the center of who I was and what I was going to be. And that was 1970. 1970, yeah. I was 26. So really, the acting bug was driving me rather than the music bug at that time. So that was, and I did. They asked me after the third album. Chrysalis asked me if I would do a tour of a college tour of the States. Mm. And I think I made too many demands, not the sort of, the ridiculous in the dressing room demands that most groups have. Just musicians, just wanting the musicians that I wanted. We couldn't agree, and finally they just let me go. They weren't hearing the music that they wanted to hear, mm-hmm. because I was writing. The songs that I was writing with a friend of mine called Martin Duncan were very, very not. They were rather theatrical and surreal and not really pop material, and not what they wanted to hear. So finally, inevitably, we parted company. But I kept writing, and writing now more than ever, actually.
Yeah. Interestingly, Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues comes from your neck of the woods, or sort of Swindon, Yorkshire. Do you ever bump into him in Tesco's or anything?
No, I don't. Is he a Swindon boy?
Swindon, he is, yeah.
Yes, no, I've never met him, no.
But I used to live in Reading, and as a boy I was a big railway enthusiast. And if I remember correctly, there was a nice railway museum in Swindon as well as Didcot. I used to go there quite often. I have one question left for you, and it's a bit of a stinker, to be honest with you, and that is, if you could name one song you'd wish you'd written, what song would that be?
Renee and Georgette Magritte with their dog after the war.
Well, that's from Paul Simon's Hearts and Bones album. Is it Hearts and Bones?
From Hearts and Bones.
Yes.
I think that, well, there are two or three that was the first one because I heard it recently. And it's an absolute, for a songwriter, to hear that is just, it's a miraculous creation.
Mhm.
The other one I would say would be he had an album in, I think it was 2000, I think, called You're the One.
Yeah,
And there's a song on that simply called Love.
yeah,
And I think that's pretty amazing as well. He's an extraordinary songwriter, but I think that it would be Renee and Georgia Magritte with their dogs. The way he brought together Magritte, the kind of surrealness of the lyric, and those old doo-wop groups, the way he brought those together is just incredible,
yeah.
extraordinary.
Do you think as a songwriter, Paul Simon tends to be rather unfairly eclipsed by Bob Dylan?
Oh yes, I mean they cross over a little bit, but I don't think he's. Is he? Do you think he's eclipsed by him?
Well, I think, you talk about great. I think it was an article that somebody said in 50 years' time that Dylan and the Beatles will probably be the only artists remembered, and
No, Paul Simon will be.
I hope so, because I think he's a remarkable, remarkable songwriter. And
Yeah.
but I just feel that critically, people tend to see him as being kind of a second tier to Bob Dylan, which I don't think is true at all.
I certainly don't. I don't listen to Bob Dylan, hardly at all. I listened to, there was an album recently which I enjoyed, and I actually I was I did a radio program, and I had to play a busker, and I did. I can't remember the Dylan song. I did a couple of Dylan songs and had to learn them, and I really enjoyed that. I did learn a Dylan song, a Springsteen song, "Dancing in the Dark," and something else as this busker. But I listened to Paul Simon a lot, and particularly that album "You're the One." Some wonderful stuff. There's a song on that called "Darling Lorraine."
That's right, yeah.
Which I think is partly the inspiration for "Sentimental Tale,"
Mhm.
a song about a couple. Yes, that was. I think you asked me about inspiration for that, and that would have been the inspiration.
Yeah.
Yes, he's an extraordinary songwriter. The experiments. I mean, he's so daring. He got into trouble for going to South Africa and doing Graceland, but I think in the end, people forgave him, and actually, he was thought of. It was thought of as a good thing to do in the end, but
Yeah. Anyway, Brian, thank you so much for doing this interview. I'll repeat that the album A Solisbury Boy is out on the 15th of September. There is a purchasing link just below this video. Brian, thank you for doing this interview. Enjoy.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. Could I just mention my grandson Theo has just started putting records out. He's been at a music college, a sixth form college in the East End, and he put his first single out a couple of weeks ago called "Grateful." His name's Theo Protheroe. Just to check it out. I'm really impressed. He's really coming along, and he's been helping me with stuff, showing things that I never knew were possible.
Okay, well, I'll definitely have to check that out. Anyway, thank you for pointing it out. Brian, you enjoy the rest of your day. The sun is shining, so
Yes, it is. I'm going to make the most of it. Thanks a lot, mate.
thanks a lot. All the best. Bye bye.